Well, I'm with Alan Collins again, and this time we're joined by Deputy Tadier, because we want to have a dialogue specifically about the application for more funding for the local abuse inquiry. Politically, Deputy, what's the status as you understand it? What's actually taking place?
Well, it's essentially the proposition which we've got here is asking for additional funding for the Committee of Inquiry. It's slightly unusual insofar as it means that there's going to be a debate probably on the wider subject of the Committee of Inquiry, and that there will be those in the States who simply don't want it, never wanted it to go ahead anyway, and I think it will be used, as we're seeing already, to reopen that argument as to whether or not it's worth having it and what the purpose of the committee.
Do you think it could be a rerun of the whole, because you were quite instrumental in initially getting the inquiry off the ground locally? We'll discuss with Alan in a moment. But could it be a rerun of the whole thing?
I think there'll be those who will take it in that direction. I got a phone call last week from a minister, and I won't say who it was. It's quite bizarre. Trying to get me to set up a meeting with the care leavers to see if they would be happy for the inquiry to end. And I think it was remarkable, firstly, in its naivety and its desperation. It's just quite frankly bizarre, and it seems to me that I can only think that apart from those who are probably genuinely worried about the cost, it's actually those who are worried about what the inquiry might turn up.
What do you think of that, Alan? Can an inquiry as this end without being completed?
I'm not aware of any precedent for that, and I struggle to see how you could abandon an inquiry at this stage. The inquiry's been up and running for some months now. It's been sitting on a regular basis. It's heard a lot of evidence. People have gone to the trouble of giving evidence to the inquiry, and to abandon it now, I dread to think what the consequences might be.
When it was initially voted, they talked about 6 million. Did you think that was a realistic figure then? Is any figure a realistic figure? Because you don't know the size of it.
It's very difficult to say. I don't know what was budgeted for or how it was planned. Inquiries are expensive, and I think they're expensive by their very nature because of the time-consuming tasks for the inquiry have to undertake, listening to witnesses, questioning witnesses, lots of documents to be considered, and I understand in this particular inquiry there's a lot of documentation going back decades, and so there's a whole mass of material for the inquiry to go through, and I think it's been unrealistic to think that there's any kind of shortcut or that evidence should just not be taken into account, because if that happened, then at the end of the process there would be criticisms that the inquiry hadn't done its job properly.
The link between cost and justice, legal aid schemes and so on, all over the place, is being made. In other words, there are cuts. Obviously there has to be, whatever the process is, a cost implication. Is it realistically to have an open-ended inquiry? Is it cost-wise realistic to do that?
Very, very difficult question, and I'm not sure that I actually know the answer, save that I would say that if you have genuinely signed up to there being an inquiry, you've got to follow it through, and obviously you've got to keep check on costs, you've got to make sure that public money is being spent properly and so on. There's those obligations.
When you say obligations, is there an obligation to any individuals that this inquiry does take place? Obviously we're thinking about the people who are so-called victims, we call them victims.
I think there is an obligation to everyone who was in care, in the care of the States of Jersey, who've alleged that they were abused, and in many cases it's been proved that they were abused whilst in care. Everyone signed up to there being this inquiry, and I think it'd be very unjust to say, sorry.
And some people will have adjusted their lives accordingly on the basis that there is to be an inquiry and the truth will come out. So
yes, indeed. There's victims, witnesses have gone to the trouble of giving their evidence to the inquiry.
Sticking their heads above the parapet. But how do you think, Marty? Is that?
I think the other point is the public interest. Of course, the stakeholders and everyone who's engaged in the process, it's important and imperative that it continues for them. But the wider public interest is there. We need answers as to know what's happened. We have entrusted government in the past to do a certain job which they failed at in a very sensitive and critical area, and we need to know if those failings are still going on, who caused the failings, whether it was benign neglect, whether it was a mixture of people deliberately abusing, etc. And I think so that the public interest needs to be satisfied.
Well, the evidence that's come out that people have heard, not many public go to there, but some of the information has been published, pretty horrendous stuff. Over, as you say, a very long period of time, obviously, and like in other inquiries that have taken place elsewhere, lots of people in senior positions knew or should have known about it, didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, and this is why I think the media have never said it, and one of the terms of reference is to look at the prosecution cases to see whether they were handled in a professional manner. Presumably, they will need to ask former Attorney Generals and law officers about the procedures.
Well, when the tribunal was first announced and the chair came and explained it to us, that was one of the questions I asked in the discussion we had about parish hall inquiries. Were there archived records of all the parish inquiries that have taken place since the war? Because I doubt very much if they are. I mean, is that realistic to expect that sort of information to come forward?
Well, I'm sure it's going to be part of the next stages, I understand it, of the inquiry, because people want to know what happened as regards the investigation of these allegations over the years.
Because this arose in a relatively recent case where a man was, I think he was sent to jail recently, but it was revealed that he'd been called in before and spoken to by the centenary and just told, well, behave yourself in future, several times. So it's obviously in relatively recent times. This is still the way it's been going on. So
I think that's the problem, is that we've got a culture, and it's not necessarily exclusive to Jersey, where people are not beyond questions. So certain decision makers, you have to take their decisions on trust, and when they're starting to be scrutinised, it's conceivable that the same people might wish for the inquiry not to continue.
We know that Senator Balash Sir Philip, who was the former bailiff, has expressed views. He's sort of talking about £50 million. Have you any idea to what length he's prepared to say it should stop? At what level is he prepared to say cap 20 million, or is he prepared to say no more? Do you have any idea what he's saying?
I don't think the figures are relevant. I think the figures are being used for political ends. We know that Senator Balash, when he was in the last Council of Ministers and Assistant Minister, was very vociferous, trying to get the Committee of Inquiry not to happen, if you can say it in that formula.
Because this is part of the wiring. I mean, this was the senior judge in the island. He was the Lord Chancellor, senior judge, President of the States, President of the Court. And when you get somebody that was got that sort of status, very important person, and when he seems to be dragging his feet on something like this, it's a bit like the old conspiracists have got some substance, haven't they?